The United States has always been seen as the land of opportunity, but for some, that opportunity was carved not through Wall Street or Silicon Valley, but through the shadows of the underworld. Mexican drug lords, traffickers, and smuggling kings have crossed the border not just with narcotics, but with ambition, building empires that stretch from the deserts of Arizona to the streets of Chicago and the nightclubs of Los Angeles. For decades, these figures have commanded billions, laundering fortunes through real estate, trucking companies, nightclubs, and offshore accounts, all while staying just out of reach of American justice. In this countdown, we reveal the top 5 richest criminal Mexicans in the USA, their estimated wealth, the scale of their operations, and why their influence still echoes in America's underworld. 5. Juan García Ábrego, net worth $500 million. Before El Chapo became a household name, Juan García Ábrego was the first true Mexican drug lord to dominate the US market. Leading the Gulf Cartel in the 1980s and 90s, Ábrego pioneered the wholesale cocaine trade across the Texas border. Unlike street dealers, he thought bigger, working directly with Colombia's Cali cartel and pushing tons of cocaine into Houston, Dallas, and beyond. By cutting out middlemen and creating direct partnerships with Colombian suppliers, Ábrego effectively transformed the Gulf Cartel into a multinational corporation of crime. His empire was vast, smuggling networks hidden within South Texas ranches, fleets of commercial trucks moving legitimate cargo alongside cocaine shipments, and warehouses scattered across border towns that acted as hubs for distribution. Ábrego's organization operated like a Fortune 500 company, complete with accountants, lawyers, and logisticians who made sure the product flowed north and the money flowed south. At one point, it was estimated the Gulf Cartel was supplying nearly a third of all the cocaine consumed in the United States. But Ábrego wasn't just a smuggler. He was a visionary businessman in the underworld. He understood that drugs brought quick cash, but laundering turned cash into power. Through a sophisticated web of front companies, he pushed millions into US construction firms, oil companies, trucking businesses, and real estate developments. This not only legitimized his fortune, but embedded cartel money directly into the American economy. It was so effective that Fortune magazine once listed him among the world's richest criminals, putting him on par with global mafia bosses. Ábrego's reign also revealed how deeply crime and politics could intertwine. He built powerful ties with corrupt Mexican officials, ensuring protection for his roots, and used US-based lawyers and bankers to shield his assets. American investigators later uncovered that his influence reached so high that entire investigations were stalled or quietly buried, as both sides of the border struggled with corruption and intimidation. Eventually, his luck ran out. In 1996, he was captured in Mexico and swiftly extradited to the United States. But even in defeat, Ábrego remained untouchable in one sense: his money. His estimated $500 million fortune had already been scattered across shell companies, offshore accounts, and hidden partnerships. Many of these assets were never recovered. To this day, people in Texas whisper that his hidden millions are still circulating in legitimate businesses, fueling construction projects, trucking companies, and even real estate ventures that appear completely ordinary. For many, Juan García Ábrego represents a turning point in cartel history. He was the man who first proved that Mexican traffickers could outgrow local smuggling and dominate the US wholesale market. His model of running drugs like a corporate empire paved the way for successors like El Chapo and El Mayo, whose fortunes would dwarf even his. But without Ábrego's blueprint, the billion-dollar cartels we know today might never have reached their scale. 4. The Flores twins, net worth $600 to $700 million. Pedro and Margarito Flores, better known as the Flores twins of Chicago, were the ultimate middlemen between Mexico's cartels and the American market. Born to Mexican immigrant parents and raised in the rough neighborhoods of Chicago's Little Village, the twins grew up surrounded by street-level dealing. But unlike local gang members, they had bigger ambitions. By the early 2000s, they had established direct connections with some of Mexico's most powerful traffickers, including none other than Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa Cartel. In the 2000s, they became El Chapo's most important US-based distributors, moving thousands of kilos of cocaine and heroin into Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. Their rise was meteoric, and for a time, they were untouchable. Instead of building their empire on intimidation and violence, the Flores brothers relied on something far more effective: logistics. They created one of the most sophisticated smuggling and distribution networks the US had ever seen. Fleets of tractor-trailers disguised cartel shipments as everyday goods: produce, furniture, electronics, while warehouses in Chicago and surrounding suburbs acted as key distribution hubs. Their system worked like a corporate supply chain, moving narcotics with military precision. From the Windy City, their network stretched east to New York and south to Miami, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in annual profits. But the twins weren't just traffickers. They were also businessmen. They laundered their money through car dealerships, real estate, and trucking firms, blending dirty cartel profits with clean US revenue streams. Luxury homes in Chicago suburbs, fleets of high-end cars, and secret investments gave them the appearance of successful young entrepreneurs rather than cartel lieutenants. By their mid-20s, they were living like kings, commanding respect on both sides of the border. Yet their story took a dramatic turn in 2008. By then, cartel wars in Mexico were spiraling out of control. The Sinaloa cartel was battling rivals, and the Flores brothers found themselves caught between factions. Facing threats from rivals and fearing for the safety of their families, the twins made a shocking choice. They flipped. In one of the most stunning betrayals in cartel history, the Flores twins began secretly cooperating with US authorities. For months, they wore hidden wires, recorded conversations, and gathered evidence against El Chapo himself. Their cooperation became critical in building the case that ultimately brought down the world's most infamous drug lord. When the twins turned themselves in, they confessed to smuggling over 60 tons of cocaine and heroin into the United States, making them two of the most prolific traffickers in American history. In 2015, both were sentenced to 14 years in prison, a surprisingly light punishment considering the scale of their crimes, proof of just how valuable their testimony was. But even as they entered prison, their hidden fortune remained a mystery. Authorities seized some assets, but many believe millions were stashed away in offshore accounts, secret real estate holdings, and businesses registered under other names. To this day, the Flores legacy lives on. Their network is still remembered as one of the most sophisticated cartel pipelines ever built inside the United States, a system so effective that law enforcement officials admit it changed the way they think about cartel infiltration on US soil. For many, the story of the Flores twins is not just about drugs. It's about the fine line between criminal empire and legitimate business. 3. Ismael El Mayo Zambada. Net worth $1 billion. Unlike El Chapo, who craved the spotlight and built a mythology around his escapes, Ismael El Mayo Zambada preferred the quiet power of the shadows. For decades, he has been the invisible hand guiding the Sinaloa cartel, co-leading one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, while deliberately avoiding the circus of fame. In the United States, his influence has been massive, stretching from the southwest border through Arizona, California, and Texas, and feeding directly into drug pipelines that reached New York, Chicago, and Miami. El Mayo's genius wasn't just in smuggling. It was in building a business empire. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana all flowed north under his command, hidden in trucks, rail cars, and even produce shipments. But unlike the brash traffickers who flaunted their wealth, El Mayo was disciplined. He funneled profits into American ranches, trucking companies, legitimate produce distributors, and sprawling real estate holdings. Investigators have long suspected that his U.S. assets alone are worth hundreds of millions, though the true figure may be much higher once offshore companies and layered shell businesses are counted. What makes El Mayo extraordinary is his survival. He has outlasted rivals, allies, and even kings like Pablo Escobar and El Chapo himself. While nearly every major cartel boss has ended up dead or locked away, El Mayo has remained untouchable. Operating through his family members and trusted lieutenants, he built a system designed to survive arrests and betrayals. Each time US and Mexican authorities believed they were close, El Mayo slipped away, leaving behind nothing but whispers and unanswered questions. His rumored fortune, often estimated at over $1 billion, is said to be spread across North America and beyond. Laundered through American banks, hidden in offshore trusts, and disguised in everyday businesses, his money has blended into the global financial system. Unlike El Chapo's empire, which collapsed in spectacular fashion, El Mayo's wealth still circulates quietly, feeding both criminal and legitimate markets. For US authorities, he represents the ultimate enigma, the ghost king of the drug world. His presence is felt in nearly every cartel shipment that crosses the border, yet his face is almost never seen. While El Chapo became a household name, El Mayo became something more dangerous, invisible. And in the underworld, invisibility is the most valuable fortune of all. 2. Rafael Caro Quintero. Net worth, $1 to $2 billion. Known as the Narco of Narcos, Rafael Caro Quintero stands as one of the original architects of modern Mexican drug trafficking. Alongside Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, he co-founded the Guadalajara cartel in the late 1970s and early 1980s, creating the organizational model that would later give rise to giants like the Sinaloa cartel. Before his rise, drug smuggling across the US-Mexico border was fragmented, with local traffickers running small-scale operations. Caro Quintero helped transform it into something far more centralized, coordinated, and ruthless. His vision was industrial. Vast marijuana plantations, some stretching across hundreds of acres, were hidden in remote valleys of Mexico. These operations were so large, they required armies of laborers, pilots, and guards to maintain them. At the same time, Caro Quintero established direct ties with Colombia's Cali cartel, ensuring steady cocaine shipments into Mexico for transport north. By the early 1980s, caravans of trucks and private planes moved tons of drugs into the US, and the profits were staggering. Cities from Los Angeles to Phoenix, Houston to Chicago felt the reach of his cartel. But what truly set Caro Quintero apart was his ability to merge criminal profits with legitimate enterprise. He wasn't just a trafficker, he was a businessman. Millions in cartel cash poured into the United States, where he invested in luxury estates in Arizona, sprawling ranches in Texas, and high-end properties in California. Each one was a fortress of wealth, protected by layers of lawyers, accountants, and shell companies. He laundered enormous sums through American banks, while also buying stakes in ranching operations, trucking companies, and construction firms. This dual life, criminal overlord and polished entrepreneur, made him both rich and incredibly dangerous. By the mid-1980s, the Guadalajara cartel had become a multi-billion-dollar empire, and Caro Quintero himself was counted among the richest and most powerful underworld figures in the Americas. However, his empire would forever be tainted by one of the darkest chapters in U.S.-Mexico history: the 1985 kidnapping, torture, and murder of DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena. The brutal killing shocked Washington and ignited one of the largest manhunts ever launched by American law enforcement. The U.S. demanded justice, and Caro Quintero became the face of cartel arrogance and brutality. He was captured later that year and sentenced to decades in prison. To many, it seemed that the reign of the narco of Narcos had ended. Yet his story was far from over. In 2013, after nearly 3 decades behind bars, a controversial legal ruling in Mexico led to his sudden release, a move that stunned both the Mexican government and the United States. Almost immediately, Caro Quintero disappeared into the mountains of Sinaloa, living as a fugitive ghost while reportedly trying to re-establish influence within the drug trade. For nearly a decade, he evaded capture, despite being one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives, with a $20 million bounty placed on his head. His eventual rearrest in 2022 by Mexican Marines closed a chapter, but it didn't erase the questions surrounding his fortune. Even after years in prison and years on the run, investigators believe vast portions of his wealth remain intact. Offshore accounts in the Caribbean and Europe, hidden property deeds under false names, and investments in legitimate American businesses are all believed to still be circulating. Unlike cash stashed in the ground, Caro Quintero's money was carefully layered into the legal financial system. And once cartel money crosses the U.S. border and enters legitimate banks, construction projects, or real estate holdings, it becomes nearly impossible to trace, let alone recover. For law enforcement, Rafael Caro Quintero is more than just a cartel kingpin. He is a symbol of how deep and lasting cartel money can penetrate American society. His story proves that the fortunes of the drug trade do not vanish when traffickers are arrested. Instead, those billions blend quietly into the financial bloodstream of the United States, outliving even the men who first made them. 1. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Net worth, $2 to $3 billion. At the very top of the list stands the most infamous of them all, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The former leader of the Sinaloa cartel, El Chapo wasn't just Mexico's most notorious drug lord. He was also America's most persistent supplier of narcotics. His name became synonymous with both staggering wealth and relentless violence. Few criminals in modern history have shaped the streets of the United States, the flow of drugs into its cities, and even the policies of its government, the way El Chapo did. His story is both a tale of ruthless ambition and a lesson in the power of organized crime. From Chicago to Los Angeles, New York to Miami, El Chapo's cartel created billion-dollar pipelines that pumped cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the U.S. market. The scope of his reach was breathtaking. At the height of his power, the DEA labeled him Public Enemy Number 1, reviving a title not used since the reign of Al Capone. The comparison was no exaggeration. Just as Capone controlled Prohibition-era alcohol and made himself untouchable in 1920s America, El Chapo commanded the narcotics trade of the 21st century, with his influence extending across continents. But narcotics were only part of the equation. What truly separated El Chapo from countless traffickers before him was his mastery of laundering money. He understood that drugs created wealth, but laundering created power. His billions didn't sit idle in duffel bags or buried in the desert. They flowed directly into the U.S. economy. He purchased sprawling estates in California, invested in trucking fleets across Texas, and quietly bought into nightclubs, casinos, and restaurants in Las Vegas. Shell corporations, some even hidden in states like Delaware, where secrecy laws protected owners, disguised cartel dollars as legitimate business income. Each new company, Each offshore account and each real estate purchase transformed dirty money into polished assets. By the 2000s, El Chapo wasn't just a trafficker, he was a shadow investor in America itself. His violent legend was amplified by his daring prison escapes. In 2001, he slipped out of a high-security Mexican prison, hidden in a laundry cart. In 2015, he shocked the world again by escaping through a mile-long tunnel dug directly into his cell. These escapes cemented his reputation as a criminal mastermind and made him into a near-mythical figure. But behind the myth, the deeper truth remained. The cartel empire he built was structured to survive without him. Even when captured, imprisoned, or hunted, the money never stopped flowing. In 2017, after years of pursuit, El Chapo was extradited to the United States, where he faced trial in New York. His conviction and life sentence in the country's most secure prison were hailed as a landmark victory for law enforcement. Yet victory came with an asterisk. The US government sought to seize an estimated $12 billion in assets connected to his operations, but only a small fraction of that sum was ever located. Billions remain unaccounted for, lost in a maze of front companies, anonymous corporations, and offshore accounts. Today, investigators estimate that $2 to $3 billion of El Chapo's wealth continues to circulate, hidden in plain sight. Some of it is tied to real estate portfolios under false names, some invested into trucking or import businesses, and some absorbed into legitimate American corporations where it is indistinguishable from legal capital. Recovering it is virtually impossible. In this way, El Chapo's legacy is not just measured in the drugs that devastated communities, but in the invisible streams of cartel capital still pulsing through the veins of the US economy. Though he now spends his days in a concrete cell in the Colorado Supermax prison, his presence remains everywhere. He lingers in the billions that passed through American banks, in the fortunes disguised under new names, and in the cartel infrastructure that continues to traffic narcotics across the border. El Chapo may be physically gone from the world stage, but the empire he built still casts a long shadow. Both Mexico and the United States continue to live with the echoes of his rise, his fortune, and the machine he perfected, one that remains alive long after its king was caged. From Juan García Ábrego's cocaine pipelines to El Chapo's billion-dollar empire, these five figures represent the hidden aristocracy of Mexican organized crime in the United States. They built dynasties not just with drugs, but with business acumen, political influence, and ruthless survival instincts. The US government has arrested, extradited, and imprisoned many of them. But the money tells a different story. Once billions enter the American financial system, they rarely disappear. Instead, they flow into homes, companies, and investments that blur the line between cartel cash and legitimate wealth. In the end, the richest Mexican criminals in the USA remind us of one chilling truth. Crime, when scaled into billions, doesn't just survive, it becomes dynasty.